So when I say there's a crisis of neglect, I don't simply mean that people are putting up with some cockroaches and vermin infestation and they need a coat of paint. I'm suggesting that something much more fundamental is happening that is calling into question the actual physical infrastructure of the housing portfolio, as they like to say. And it's enormously serious. As Barry alluded to in the beginning, there is a figure being bandied around of $300 million within Toronto that is needed not to create Shangri-La, but to actually bring the buildings up to a basic standard, a basic legal standard that they don't deny they are not complying with. They don't really deny that they're not complying with Section 70 of the Residential Tenancies Act. They don't deny that they're not providing what they need to. And the level at which things are deteriorating really can be seen very, very clearly in many of the buildings, but one particular example that stands out to me is the building that exists at 251 Sherbourne. We know the building well because we actually used to have an office in it until the previous mayor arranged to get us kicked out of there. But it's a place that until a few years ago was providing a lot of family-based homes. But it's deteriorating now to the point that even though there are 70,000 people on the waiting list, they actually can't take people off the waiting list and put them in there because the building is so bad. And so what they're doing is dumping people in there under the so-called Streets to Homes program, homeless people with no supports, and really just feeding a process of just deterioration and neglect that is that's absolutely appalling. And I think the point that needs to be understood is that where this leads us to is certainly the destruction of public housing, but the way in which that is unfolding is through the so-called process of revitalisation, what is happening in Regent Park, where the goal is to pull down the existing structures and have the developers put up condominiums. And the notion is that this will be now a healthy, mixed community. I'm always struck by the fact that when they want to mix communities, it's always the poor who are told that you need to be mixed. There's something unhealthy about you all living together. Nobody ever goes up to Rosedale and says that that's unhealthy because it's unmixed. But what they're looking to do is through this notion of the mixed community is create the Regent Park model. And I think it's I think you have to be either willfully deceptive or naive to the point where you have diminished responsibility to believe that a model like that is viable within a market economy. To suggest that you're going to be able to, in prime downtown real estate, build condos and then say, don't worry, there's going to be a rent geared to income component within the new development and it's all going to work out fine, is the most absurd proposition. As if the middle class professionals who move in there are going to be saying to themselves, this is just so wonderfully diverse, I just love living in this community, it's just what I've always dreamed of. Quite the reverse. What's going to happen, of course, is that even within the co-op model, where people live in a place that they pay into but have no direct individual ownership in, even in the co-op model, there is considerable tension between the middle class professionals and the rent geared to income poor. But now what we're talking about is actually a situation where condo owners, homeowners, have a piece of property and they are expected to live side by side with rent geared to income people. Clearly, their own self-interest, their property values and their quality of life ensures that this notion of a mixed neighbourhood is just not going to work. The lion is not going to lie down with the lamb in this particular instance, in my opinion. And I think that's fairly self-evident. Already in phase one of the Regent Park redevelopment, the rent geared to income component actually on the site has already been reduced, and the definition of Regent Park has been extended to other places outside. But the proportion is already going down. The plan is clearly, I believe, or if it's not the plan, and I believe it is, but if it's not the plan, clearly the end result is going to be the elimination of the rent geared to income component over a period of time. So to believe that we're going to deal with the crisis of housing, of neglect of housing within public housing by demolishing the structures and building condo communities with a rent geared to income component, I think is just not a viable option at all. Now, what I think needs to be understood is that this process is being fed by the whole agenda of redevelopment that has emerged over the last number of years and has reached a level of frenzy. There is a rampant supply of upscale housing and commercial development, but there is no investment at all in the provision of affordable or social housing. That what has occurred actually is the reverse process of suburbanisation, where initially capital left the downtown, the central areas of the city and moved out to the fringes. But now, precisely because they created a relatively barren area where there wasn't investment and where property values were not as high, it suddenly became lucrative to move back again. And so capital investment is being drawn back into the central areas of the city. And some prime areas of public housing that have been left relatively unnoticed for periods of time suddenly become prime investment material. And I think that's very largely what it's all about. And the reason I say that is because I think we need to understand that the way the issue is being presented in the media and publicly is really not at the nub of the issue. Public housing is up for destruction because it stands in the way of lucrative capital investment, not primarily, in my opinion, because of how governments want to prioritise their spending. You see, there's Toronto Housing itself will acknowledge that it's not doing the repairs it needs to do, it doesn't have the money, it needs to spend $300 million that it doesn't have, and that Queen's Park is responsible. Well, in a certain sense, that's not, of course, at all untrue. Mike Harris downloaded public housing. It is massively underfunded. It should be the higher levels of government that are paying for the thing, and that's unquestionably true. I'm not disputing it at that level. But the notion that it's simply a jurisdictional dispute between different levels of government is not, I believe, the answer. The simple fact is, I believe, that while at the municipal level they may be politically pointing the finger at Queen's Park, the agenda of redevelopment and the destruction of public housing is entirely in line with what's happening at the municipal level. To put it bluntly, in my personal opinion, if Dalton McGuinty were to become ill one day and to walk into City Hall with a cheque for $300 million to fix up the public housing, I think David Miller would probably ask him if he could give it to the cops to buy a helicopter. The fact is that they don't want the housing stock to be repaired, and they don't want to deal with the crisis that exists, because the deterioration of public housing is exactly in line with the overall agenda that predominates both at Queen's Park and at City Hall. And if we reduce this to a question of who we should lobby, where we should go after, I think we're making a very, 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 very fundamental mistake. What we need to do, I believe, is mobilise tenants and supporters to actually challenge the agenda and to demand that the buildings be fixed up and not be torn down.